So hello everyone from the Kingdom of Cambodia. Now today we are talking about something I've wanted to speak about for a while, and it's about why so many either former progressives or people who were pretending to be progressive, why do they end up as conservatives? And mainly we're focusing on like the foreign policy element and supposed anti-imperialist, former progressive and leftists, and why so many end up to be these weird conspiracy theorists or literally just support any regime that opposes the West. Now, the way I'm framing that, you guys are probably automatically thinking about Jimmy Dore or Tulsi Gabbard, but it's actually really interesting how we can go through like different people and assess whether they were hiding their real beliefs, whether they actually had their brain broken by certain things, or whether they are just like straight up grifters. And sometimes it's a mix of all three. Like Jimmy Dore is a grifter. Did Jimmy Dore have a political evolution based on certain things? And it's pretty clear he also did. So what I want to talk about today is these anti-imperialists and why they just have such weird politics. And I also want to criticize more like lib-leftists, because often I've been thrown in with these people, which is absolutely bizarre to me, because these guys are now like outwardly supporting Russia, which people accuse me of doing as well. And I think that's just interesting because it shows there is really no room for nuance. And we actually have two sides on the political spectrum on like kind of the leftist side. And it's these like post-leftists, former leftists who've basically had their brain broken by growing up in America and stuff, and they support anyone who opposes America, like Iran or Russia. And then we have like lib-leftists who basically can acknowledge America as bad, but also kind of support the American status quo. So if you try and have any nuance on like foreign policy, for example, they will lump you in with people like Jimmy Dore. Like I said, that has happened to me a lot in the past, and we're going to talk about all of that today, especially because a lot of these people just participated in like a Rage Against the War rally about Ukraine. And it turns out that like loads of them are actually pro-war because they support Russia. Not only do they support Russia in that they're taking the side of Russia in the war, they literally support Russia doing the war in the first place. These are the people talking at a supposed anti-war rally. It's absolutely amazing, but we're going to talk about all of this today. We're going to talk about different characters, and I'm going to talk about like my perspective, because although we have like terrible grifters, people who really don't have good intentions, also a lot of people follow these people. A lot of people subscribe to Jimmy Dore. A lot of people follow Tulsi Gabbard. Not every one of them is like a really terrible person or a crazy person. They are just being misled. And there are certain conditions that make it easy for them to be misled because they grow up in a country like America or the UK that literally lies to you your entire life. And once you figure that out, I think sometimes a lot of people are ripe for being indoctrinated in more like right-wing ways of thinking and stuff. So we're going to get into all of that today. But before we get any further, please like the video. In the comments, let me know who is the worst one of these like anti-imperialists. I think Jackson Hinkle, is it Jason Hinkle? There's two people there who are very different. I'm gonna look at my notes to see who I'm actually talking about, but you guys will know. It's that guy who's younger than me, who's essentially morphed into like Ron DeSantis. Like he looks like Alex Jones. But let me know down in the comments. Also follow me on Twitter at the Kavernacle, and follow me on Instagram, the same username. Instagram is where I'm posting about my travels around Southeast Asia, and it's all archived on the highlight reel page on my actual profile page, so go check that out if you're interested. Also consider becoming a patron. I'm trying to build up as many $1 to $3 patrons as possible, and you get access to exclusive travel content and also access to the private patrons Discord server, and also my Nintendo Switch friend code. And also check out the subreddit and check out my second channel. The links to all of those things are down in the description. So I kind of wanted to talk about the political spectrum thing just a bit before we move further. So like I said, I feel like we have like these post-left people like Kim Iverson, Jimmy Dore, Tulsi Gabbard, people in the past who have espoused like progressive politics, but have now moved firmly past that. And often what they do is kind of take the framing of like more like leftist ideology, like anti-capitalism, for example, or anti-imperialism, anti-US imperialism, but it really leads them to really crazy conclusions. Like, think about how Jimmy Dore has been radicalized against like everything to do with vaccines because he's so against big pharma. And then of course you had the anti-imperialism stuff where they'll say like, you know, we're spending all this money on war, we invaded Iraq for oil, but then if you then turn around and support Russia doing like similar things, then you aren't anti-war. So you can't take the framing of that, because fundamentally these people have had their brains broken by living in America and being fed like American propaganda. So they think anyone who stands up to America is good. And then, like I said, there's the pro-American left who basically think, well, yeah, America are bad, but the American-dominated status quo, while flawed, is actually better than the alternative. And they can't imagine a world that is different from this, because they think, well, if America isn't the leader, then Russia's the leader or China's the leader. Not that there can be a world, multipolar world, which people like Lula talk about, where significant powerful countries either exist in blocks or kind of like balance each other out. So America doesn't completely dominate like world institutions like the UN and IMF and things like that. And then that leaves people like myself, because I'm not in either camp. I'm a communist. I fundamentally think America is the most evil country in the world. I think America since World War II has been the most damaging country in the world, killed the most people, done absolutely awful things. I'm in Cambodia right now. I'm going to Vietnam again soon. And here is where you can see the terrible effects of what the US has done. Like, even in Cambodia, not only did the US help create the conditions for Pol Pot to come to power for what they were doing in Cambodia, but also when he was overthrown by the Vietnamese government, they backed him and gave him weapons and helped fund his insurgency against the new Cambodian government, on top of all the terrible things they did in Laos and Vietnam as well. Like, even that alone is literally one of the worst things that has happened in modern history, and the US just acts like it's nothing. And then we can talk about like all the stuff they've done in the modern era, all the stuff to do with propping up this terrible capitalist system. And in my mind, although many countries are terrible in their own right, like if we talk about Iran, if we talk about Russia, for example, they are terrible. They also aren't as powerful as the US. They also don't have the same reach as the US. They also cannot dictate world affairs like the US. I have no doubt that Russia would if it could, and that might look worse, but that's never going to happen. The US is the hegemonic power that does all these awful things. I do not support the hegemonic power, and I don't support how it uses its spheres of influence. And something people have gotten on me about a lot is that I don't agree with NATO, and I think NATO's a bad thing. And I think everything going on in the world right now proves this, because if NATO was about keeping Europe safe, why do we have the US in it? And why do we have Turkey in it as well? Like, Turkey, who's fighting like proxy wars with Russia in the Middle East right now. Like, that's the country we want to keep Europe safe when it doesn't care about Europe in the slightest. Same with America. It doesn't really care about Europe in the slightest. It makes European countries that have no interest in the Middle East basically fighting US wars. Like, Denmark has gone along with all the US wars. Do you think Denmark cares about Iraq and Afghanistan? No. They're doing it to appease the US, so it defends them. So in my mind, I've always said, if we're going to have a defensive alliance, it has to be just European countries, no Turkey and no US allowed, because that fundamentally makes us way, way unsafer. But again, this worldview doesn't fit in with either side. And that's why people on the lib-left often call me something like Jimmy Dore, because I have nuance. I don't think the US has many redeeming qualities, and I fundamentally oppose US imperialism, but because I'm also a leftist and a communist, my solidarity is with the people of the world. So when it comes to something like Ukraine, I don't support the Ukrainian capitalist oligarchical state. I don't support the laws they've enacted against leftists, unions and stuff like this. I don't particularly like Zelensky, despite thinking it was brave he stayed behind when the invasion began. But again, to people on the lib-left, they think I'm like Jimmy Dore for saying that, because my solidarity is with Ukrainians defending their homes, not with the Ukrainian capitalist state, which I don't really care about. The same way, if Russia invaded England tomorrow, I'm not going to start babbling about how England is like a beacon of freedom and democracy. I wouldn't say anything nice about the Tory government. I would simply support English people's right to self-defense. But again, to people on one side, it breaks their brain. They're like, oh, you support Russia because you don't support Zelensky. And then on the other side, they're like, well, you're like a NATO shill because you have criticisms of Russia. So it does feel like I'm in like a very weird place with these two groups. And it does infuriate me that people would dare say I'm like the Jimmy Dore crowd, because I am absolutely nothing like them, because they simply oppose imperialism when it's done by America, because they simply only care about their own like tax dollars and stuff like that, and the waste American imperialism is doing, so they can't benefit off the American system themselves. In terms of things like healthcare, they fundamentally want to save money. A lot of these people don't actually care about people losing their lives. Tulsi Gabbard's a great example. She doesn't actually hate war, she just hates American waste, and that's where a lot of people on that side, that's where their whole worldview is centered. Of course, I also did my master's degree in like international relations. I wrote my thesis on public opinion, media, the first Gulf War, and so I feel like I'm informed enough on foreign policy and stuff that I can have these more nuanced opinions. But it feels like neither side really want nuance. Like, to one side, they kind of just want the good versus evil. To the other side, they think the initiators of this war are actually the good guys. So just getting all that stuff out the way and outlining like how I differ from these groups, not that I should really have to do that, I want to get into this Rage Against the War Machine rally. Now, I posted an image on screen, and it's basically a lineup of this Rage Against the War Machine rally and all the speakers involved. And you don't really need to look too closely, but notice you probably won't find any actual like left-wing people on there. They're all like weird libertarians, conservatives. Don't worry, we're going to get into who some of these anti-war figures are. But basically what they did is organize a rally near the Lincoln Memorial. Now, you think when you hear something like Rage Against the War Machine, they're probably just people who are advocating for a diplomatic solution to the end of the war. That's fair enough. They want to end the war because they hate war, they hate death, they hate destruction and instability, they hate all these people having their lives ruined. That's why they care about it. Well, it's pretty much just turned into a pro-war rally where they actually just support Russia. And I'm not someone who throws around that allegation like loosely. These people are literally waving Russian flags while actually saying they support Russia. Obviously, because there's so many like libertarians here, they got like Ron Paul speaking, someone saying the greatest American hero, and they have stuff like this, like they lied about Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, but trust them on Ukraine diplomacy now. And we're going to talk about this at the end, about why so many of these people even exist. And you see here pretty clearly, it's because they don't trust the US government, but we're going to get back to that. Then you have like Jack Posobiec also tweeting this out. Like, that probably says everything about the Rage Against the War Machine rally. And then you have obviously a lot of people there waving Russian flags. Apparently that's anti-war. And then you have speakers like this. Colonel Douglas Macgregor was a speaker who played a significant role in the battlefield in the first Gulf War and took part of the NATO action in Yugoslavia in 1999. And his thinking contributed to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Like, this is one of your anti-war figures, like a player, an architect of like multiple US wars. You have this person called Anya Parampil, and basically what a lot of these people are doing is they're talking about like transgender people for some reason. So she tweeted about this saying, "We can debate whether or not teenage girls should have to share locker rooms with biological males later, lovely. If the US continues down this war path, those questions won't matter." Well, it seems like they don't matter to you anyway. And then even in her speech, she shouted out Scott Ritter.
I want to give it up to Scott Ritter. He unfortunately couldn't speak today, but I just want to point out that more than anybody on this stage, Scott is actually someone who knows what it feels like to risk and lose everything, and he did it in order to stand up to the greatest humanitarian catastrophe so far this century, the Iraq War. So thank you, Scott.
Who was meant to speak at this, and if you type in Scott Ritter into Google, you get a nice headline like this. Like, these are the type of people who are speaking at Rage Against the War March. Of course, you have Tulsi Gabbard there as well. Tulsi Gabbard, who we're going to get onto a bit later, who obviously clearly hates war. So one of the organizers was called Nick Branner, and he tweeted this. He retweeted a Bloomberg headline that says, "How does Putin stay so popular while losing the war?" And he says, because he's not only winning the war, he's uniting the world against American hegemony. And I think that is a tweet that like encapsulates so much of this thinking on this group of like weird libertarians and former leftists. Of course, we also have Jackson Hinkle right here being a speaker, and he was tweeting a lot about this. If you just go on his Twitter recently, these are some of his tweets. So, "We will save America and eliminate woke Nazism from the face of the earth. I'd like to make it very clear for everyone alleging that I'm a supporter of Russia's special military operation. I am." Again, this guy was a key speaker at a Rage Against the War Machine rally, while clearly saying he supports war. So before I outline like why so many people gravitate towards this sphere of thinking, just like your average people, not the key figures involved, I thought we'd go through the key figures that I know a bit better, because some of those people I don't really know that well, but it's just funny to me that they're at an anti-war rally. Supposedly some of them are leftists, but also talking about transgender people when they're opposing war. But I thought we'd start with Tulsi Gabbard first. So Tulsi Gabbard used to be quite popular in leftist circles, not only because she was like anti-imperialist in like the American intervention sense, but because she also supported Bernie Sanders when it was more unpopular to do so. But she also got famous for going on Fox News a lot back in like, I think like 2014, 2015, and talking about like how much she opposed like Obama and stuff like that. And it was normally focusing on Islamic insurgents, because fundamentally Tulsi Gabbard, I'm pretty sure, just hates Muslim people, and that's why she has no problem allying herself with Modi in India and allying herself with people like Assad, who are Baptists, who don't like Islamists, because she views the world in that Islam is like one of the biggest dangers, because she was involved, of course, in the Iraq war to begin with. Also, she grew up in a homophobic cult as well, which is pretty telling when she started making her new political identity recently, basically on opposing transgender people and the LGBT community. So it seems like a nice full circle moment that she started her work in politics helping her dad, who was an extremely homophobic politician, and then she's now at the stage in her life where she is literally being her dad in a kind of like 2023 sense. But she was at this anti-war rally, and something she's always been fairly consistent on was opposing America's military-industrial complex, saying like, we are wasting so many lives, we're wasting so much money we could be using back home. I feel like with Tulsi Gabbard, her main ideology for a lot of this stuff is basically motivated by just hating Muslims, but also she's not anti-war, she's not anti-imperialism. In 2021, she wrote this on Twitter: "Aloha, you haven't heard much from me lately as I've been gone for the last 4 months on an active duty tour and deployment to Africa as a special affairs officer supporting a special forces mission to go after Islamic insurgents. It was truly my honor to work with the incredible patriots, experienced, focused warriors with an unwavering commitment to serve our country. We should never forget that no matter the decisions made by the politicians and careerists in the Pentagon, it's our men and women who selflessly and quietly defend the safety and security and freedom of our country every single day." So Tulsi Gabbard, a key speaker at the Rage Against the War Machine rally, is literally working in the war machine in Africa. So that's not imperialism. That's not the military-industrial complex. You're not helping them by going to Africa to watch as US servicemen fight African people over what? For what reason? Are they keeping Americans safe from African insurgents? Like, is that really a threat to America? That's the type of thing Tulsi Gabbard has criticized throughout her life. But again, if it's a group of Muslims, then she's all game for going along with the military-industrial complex and American imperialism, because, yeah, if they're hurting Muslim people, I guess imperialism is actually okay. And through that lens, you can see why she doesn't have a problem with Russia allying with Assad, as they both fought Islamists in the Syrian civil war, because she supports that. And if Russia start doing war crimes in Syria, I don't think she's really crying about that too much. And like I've always said to these people, if Julian Assange had exposed Russian war crimes, none of them would care about them. If he was rotting in Siberia right now, no one would care about him. They simply like Assange because he exposed something that helps their political cause, not that Assange should be free to basically save the independent press. Tulsi Gabbard, I firmly believe she's just a careerist politician and a grifter first and foremost. She now was hosting like Tucker Carlson recently, and I believe a lot of the anti-imperialist rhetoric was just like some populist language for a while, maybe motivated by her own experiences in the armed forces, but no one can tell me someone can bang on about the military-industrial complex and how bad American imperialism is, and then go and actually do the imperialism herself in just 2021. Again, this person is full of rubbish, is full of garbage. You can't trust her being anti-war because she's not anti-war. She's only anti-war when it's convenient to her. She is a fave for a lot of these like anti-imperialist types. But to move on a bit further, I want to talk about Jimmy Dore, because I find him the most interesting out of all of these people. Like, I don't think he's particularly ever been like a nice guy or anything, but I think it's pretty clear part of his political evolution has been genuine. Like, okay, I know he did buy a mansion recently for all the money he was making off his YouTube channel, but as someone who has watched TYT since I was like 16, and of course Jimmy Dore was constant on TYT throughout those years, and sometimes I'd watch his own show just when he was talking about things, it was pretty clear he got radicalized by what happened to Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders comes along, of course, loads of people gravitate towards him because he is giving this populist message and talking about how you can fundamentally fix America and fixing problems which harm so many people and fixing problems that are so obvious to loads of people. So of course Jimmy Dore supports that, but then it's pretty clear the Democrats are never going to let Bernie Sanders win, and there's evidence of them actually undercutting him and making sure he didn't win. And of course that was even more cemented with the next primary for 2020, where every single person dropped out when he was winning to endorse Biden. So Biden won, so it's not like conspiratorial thinking in that regard. But I firmly believe this basically broke Jimmy Dore's brain, and he became increasingly radicalized by the Democrats, who were just like feckless. They lost to Donald Trump. Remember those videos going around of like TYT reaction to Trump being elected? He was really, really angry. And I think that really, really radicalized him more against the Democrats than the Republicans. And increasingly over time, the only videos he would make were actually criticizing the Democrats. That went on to include Bernie Sanders as well. Like, he would criticize these people going along because he felt like everyone was complicit in this terrible, terrible system, which obviously victimized so many, and they were wasting so much money abroad all the time while not spending it at home. So Jimmy Dore did often view things through like maybe a bit of an anti-capitalist lens, basically saying that they screw over everyone in America and there's always money for war, which is true. But then he became more and more radicalized during the pandemic, of course. Then he just started becoming like Tim Pool or any one of these other people, where all his videos would just be criticizing leftist people or criticizing the Democrats while never having a bad word to say about any conservatives, and of course pushing loads of anti-vax conspiracy theories, which basically became the bread and butter of his channel for a long, long time while that stuff was really popular. But even now, go on his channel, it's still there. He's still talking about this stuff. But even in his speech at this rally, he started talking about, you know, what we could solve in America with the $100 billion given to Ukraine. And that's why I guess like a lot of people are attracted to him. But at the end of the day, now his brain has been so broken, he thinks like the pandemic was invented by the capitalist class so they could sell the medicine and stuff like that. Like, he's properly gone into unhinged conspiracy territory. And he was always partial to conspiracy theories throughout his career on YouTube, but it just became increasingly worse. And then he just became a post-leftist, where he's now attacking woke leftists. He's now attacking transgender people. He's basically becoming indistinguishable from a conservative, just like Tulsi Gabbard. The only difference is he's using like this populist language similar to Donald Trump in 2016. And it's so funny that Donald Trump was part of this guy's radicalization. And I could totally see this guy voting for Trump in the next election if Trump starts saying stuff about we shouldn't waste money in Ukraine and stuff like that. And that's all these people need to hear because they have been so radicalized by the American system, which I'm going to touch on a bit later. So that's Jimmy Dore, and I find that more interesting because, of course, he's grifting, but I fully believe he's also been radicalized by various different things. But I think Bernie losing the primary and Donald Trump winning the election were two key things that set him off. So now we get to someone like Jackson Hinkle, and I don't really want to talk about this guy too much because you guys remember he was like a really, really small lefty streamer. And then he became more conservative, started talking about like MAGA communism, and then he just straight up saying he's an American patriot and he supports Russia, right? So in this case, this guy is about like 5 years younger than me, despite looking like 15 years older. And I just think he's grifting. Like, he likes the attention, he likes the popularity, he likes being invited on TV shows, he likes being interviewed, he likes doing all these podcasts. It happens to a lot of people. They like the standing they receive. People like Jimmy Dore and Tulsi Gabbard were already popular. So although I feel like they are grifters and careerists, I don't think their turn towards certain elements of politics is entirely motivated by fame and money. With this Jackson guy, it's just so obvious. It's just so cringe. The thing I will say, as someone who has engaged with some of his posts, just ignore him because he knows you're going to hate on him. He's like that Nick Adams, you know, that Australian conservative. He is in on the joke now, where he knows this is a good way to get popular on social media by posting stuff that he knows leftist people will hate on, and that's why he does it, and that's why he's playing like this contrarian, being controversial. He wants a social media engagement because I guess it will find people who agree with him, and then he'll get more popular More money, more TV shows, all that stuff. So he's better left ignored because unlike Tulsi Gabbard and Jimmy Dore, I don't think he even represents anything. Like, there aren't people who are like 22 going through this like extreme political evolution because they're not motivated by fame and money, where taking Jimmy Dore especially is more interesting because I think he's representative of a lot of people who are entering like this circle of politics. So I think the fundamental question is, why are these people relevant? Why are these people popular? Why do people like them? And although it's easy to dismiss these people, not take them seriously, I think that'd be wrong. Because honestly, I think the reason they gravitate towards Jimmy Dore and others is because of America, you grow up being told this is the best country on earth. You grow up being told like capitalism is great. You grow up being fed this history of America, which completely whitewashes any bad things they do in a lot of states. I know a lot of you who grew up in California, you tell me you learn about the bad things, but to a lot of people, they don't even learn about the bad things. And then one day you come to the realization that this whole system is a lie, that people in other countries don't die because the healthcare industry is completely predatory and is completely unregulated, including big pharma, including drug pricing and stuff like that. You then realize as you get older, the whole system is designed to enrich a small 1% at the expense of everyone else. And that includes all the money they have to spend on things like foreign wars, where they take like working class Americans, put them into the meat grinder, use them for these wars, and when they come back home, they have terrible aftercare, so they just get discarded by the same country that used them to further like their goals to basically enrich the 1%. And just speaking from my own experience, I can totally relate to a lot of people. Like, you grow up thinking, oh, Britain is a great country. Britain is a tolerant country. Britain is a prosperous country. Isn't it great to be British? We are diverse. We have a rich history. Britain was even a force for good in the world. Like, how much we get banged over the head with World War I and World War II propaganda in the UK, like about Churchill, for example, is absolutely insane, but it does take effect. And I'm someone from an Irish background, and until about like 2016, I didn't hate the UK. What happened with Brexit is there was so much like xenophobic and racist campaigning, and then our country voted for Brexit, and I'm like, I'm done with the UK. Like, this has really revealed to me the face of the UK, and just from then, increasingly, I just learned more and more about the UK. Oh yeah, like the UK, not only were they not good, they were evil in the world. And of course, I started identifying more with like my Irish heritage. Like, one of my relatives was the leader of the Easter Rising in 1916. He was actually the planner and he got executed for it. And I just more identified with that struggle against settler colonialism, because in the UK, what you get brainwashed is UK good, America good, NATO good, EU good, Israel good, Palestine bad, Muslims bad, and everything we do in that regard is justified somewhat. The only thing I will say is that some stuff like Iraq and Afghanistan are things that a lot of people like never supported, and it was very easy to discard that. But also because that was Labour doing that, a lot of people associate that with Labour, so they still supported like the Conservatives doing similar things to a less extent, like Libya, for example. I think the main thing is, as well, for me personally, communism gets so demonized in our society. Like, communism is demonized in the UK. It's far more demonized in the US. And then you realize throughout history, like, although there are like bad facets of communist regimes, you realize that the UK was just so much worse in many respects. Like, we think about World War II as like a binary struggle, good versus evil. But then as you get older, you realize that the UK and the US let some of the worst war criminals off to put them in post-war governments to fight communism. Like, look at the history of post-World War II Greece, and you see that. The communist insurgents who fought the Germans throughout the whole war, the British literally put German collaborators in the new government who then cracked down on the communists who helped the Allies fight the Germans in Greece. Like, this is the stuff that like breaks your brain. And in America, it's even worse. CIA, MK Ultra, all these terrible regime changes. And you realize as you get older, you're like, oh my God, I am living in such a terrible country. And I can understand why so many people have their brains fully broken by this, because to a lot of people, you can't handle that realization. You can't handle that you've basically been told Santa Claus is real until you're like 25 or 30, and then one day you're told he's not real or something like that, because your whole worldview has now changed, and you're like, has everything I've ever been taught, has that all been wrong? Do I view the world in the wrong way? And that's why I think when I see people supporting like North Korea, Iran and Gaddafi, sometimes I just kind of feel bad, because I'm like, you've been radicalized so bad, you think these people are good. And that's what happens sometimes. They view anyone who stands up to America as good, because they finally realized America is the bad guy. America is so evil, where someone like me, I still think America is the worst country in the world in terms of like their negative impact on the world. But at the same time, I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, based Iran fighting against US imperialism, or based Russia fighting against US imperialism, or North Korea. I'm just not going to do that, because you can seek out reputable sources on things like North Korea from academics who had connections from the Soviet times. And yeah, you realize it's not a good place to live. I've made videos, of course, like criticizing these North Korean grifters who basically make up loads of stuff so we all hate North Korea and demonize it more so we can all like accept sanctions, which hurt the poorest people in North Korea. But at the same time, you need a nuanced worldview where you can accept that one country is the worst, others are bad, but I'm also not going to go along with the propaganda from that country that makes me think this other one is bad, if that makes sense. And like I said, I think to a lot of people, they just can't handle the realization that you grew up thinking one country was good and realizing it's the worst. And then you just think anyone who's demonized by this government, anyone who's sanctioned by this government, they must be doing it because they're standing up against US imperialism, and we need to critically support that government no matter what they do. And I feel like nuance just isn't something you can attract people to, because it's so much easier to have things that fall down on one side. Like either Iran is based in standing up against US imperialism, Iran is bad and deserves all these sanctions, and there doesn't feel like there's any middle ground. And I think like that's why this like Jimmy Dore circle appeals to people, because they say, look at that. Look at Biden in Ukraine. He's not doing anything for you. All the money for Ukraine, and you can't afford prescription drugs. You can't afford healthcare. That's what he cares about. So buying to our way of thinking, therefore, because America is so evil, any country against them must therefore be good. So this video might have felt a bit more ranty, but I guess the conclusion is I sympathize with people who get radicalized living in late stage capitalism in the West, because you have so many things going on there. You have, our lives getting far worse than previous generations. You have corporations continually growing their power over us. The UK is literally run by hedge fund managers right now. The US is pretty useless with Biden doing nothing against the rise of the far right in America, who might take over the government in the next election. And it just feels so hopeless. And when you're feeling so hopeless, you're feeling like such a doomer, it seems like the people speaking truth to power are the people saying stuff that really go against the United States. But then because you're so radicalized, I feel like a lot of people are more susceptible to having these more radical views in terms of not only do you hate the US, which is fine, not only do you oppose the US, which is fine, you start supporting countries which are fundamentally just as bad as the US in many ways, like Russia, because it's fighting a war against a country the US supports. Like, that is how much this radicalizes you and rots your brain, that anyone who thinks they care about life and thinks they care about stopping wars could support a country like Russia is absolutely insane. But like I said, I feel bad for these people, because I feel like we could offer them a different solution. We could offer them a different worldview, more in terms of like framing the world in terms of capitalism and anti-capitalism rather than anti-imperialism, because I think that's the flaws of often viewing the world through anti-imperialism, especially in America, because you're viewing it in terms of like American control, not so much that America is the country that has created this capitalist system to benefit itself the most, but it's definitely a system that could one day be taken over by another country, because who did America take over the global capitalist system from? It took it over from the British Empire in the first place. So although America is the country perpetuating this imperialist capitalist system and stuff like that, we have to look at our problems in terms of capitalism with imperialism, rather than just like, oh, America bad doing imperialism. Everyone who stands up to their imperialism with their own imperialism is good, even if they are all capitalists. And I guess that's the point I want to drive home. But anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you've made it this far, thank you for watching.